Chapter 2, Section 4 is all about the distributive property. So a couple vocab words for you tonight. The distributive property is a method used to multiply a sum or a difference by a number. A term is a number, variable, or the product of a combination of numbers and variables. A constant is a term that has no variable, so just a plain old number. Coefficient is the number in front of a variable. And like terms are terms with the same variable combination. So make sure you have examples of each of these for tomorrow. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to use the distributive property and to simplify algebraic expressions. So the distributive property states that if you have a number multiplied by the sum or difference, so sum, difference, that it's the same thing as multiplying that number by each of the contents inside the parentheses. And this works for a ton of things inside the parentheses. We tend to use it for just two, but if you had A times B plus C plus D minus E, you could still distribute this A to all of the things inside of here. So use the distributive property to simplify numbers. Most of the time when we have used the distributive property in the past, we tend to do it with algebraic expressions, which we'll get to, but the distributive property is also really useful to multiply numbers together. So when I start doing 34 times 102 in my head, think about how you can break apart 102. Multiplying anything by 100 is pretty easy, and multiplying by 2 is also pretty easy. So what we're going to do is take apart that number. Instead of just calling it 102, turn it into 100 plus 2. And then this multiplication is pretty simple because 34 times 100 is 3,400 and 34 times 2 is just 68. And then this is something I can quickly add together rather than breaking out this 102 times the 34 and doing all that together, but we'd get the same number. So if you can do this in your head, that's awesome, but I want to see work for this. And 98 is very similar. 98 is really close to 100, but instead of writing it as 98, let's write it as 100 minus 2. Because again, this multiplication is really easy. 24 times 100 is 2400. And 24 times 2 is just 48. And then all we have to do is subtract those two things. So when I do this in my head, I think 48 is pretty close to 50. So if I take away 50, I'd have 2,350. But because I'm only taking away 48, I'd have 2,352. So the distributive property can be used for more than just algebraic expressions. But this is what we're used to, having a number on the outside of parentheses with stuff inside that we can't simplify. We cannot combine 3 minus 7t. So our only option to simplify this is to take 2 and multiply by 3, and 2 times 7t. So 2 times 3 gives me 6. 2 times negative 7t is going to give me negative 14t's. And then we can do the same thing with this. Now this one looks a little different because our number is on the back side of our parentheses, but it's still the same thing. We still can multiply 3 times 1.1c and 3 times 0.4. So when we multiply 3 times 0.4, we get 12, and then there's one number after the decimal, so we have one number after the decimal. And I look at this as like 11 times 3, so that'd be 33 c's. But then again, there's one number after the decimal, so I need one number after the decimal. And then remember, we can't combine 1.2 and 3.3c because they are not like terms. Now one like this next one, 2a, has just a negative floating on the outside. Remember that that's like having a negative 1 times everything inside the parentheses. So basically what's going to happen is I'm going to change the signs of everything inside when I multiply by negative 1. So same thing with 2b, except the number's on the back side. That's still fine. We can like backwards distribute. Make sure you're very careful with how you distribute this. This is negative 1 times positive 3. So that gives me negative 3. And then it's negative 1 times negative 8a. So remember, two negatives make a positive. And then again, we can't simplify this because one has an A and one doesn't, so we're done. So when we go to simplify, we need to know these four vocab terms. In an algebraic expression, a term is a number, variable, or the product of a number and one or more variables. So each one of these guys right here is a term. A number and a variable, or a combination of numbers and variables. A constant is a term that doesn't have a variable, so that negative 12 right there is a constant. And then the 6, the 5, and 3 are all coefficients. We call them numerical factors of a term, or the number part. So not the variable, but just the number part. Like terms are terms that have exactly the same variable factors. So 3x and 2x, negative 5x squared and 9x squared. xy, negative xy. The letter parts are the same. Not like terms, a better example would be like 8x and 8y. So even though the number part's the same, because the letter part's not the same, these are not like terms. We could not combine them. So let's simplify this. If I have 7 y's plus 6 more y's, all you have to do is add the number out front. Think of this as like 7 yo-yos plus 6 yo-yos. We would end up with 13 yo-yos. We don't make it yo-yo squared, we don't change the letter, we just have 13 y's. B is a little tricky because this is like 1t. We just don't tend to write the 1. So if you have 3 toilets and you take away 1 toilet, you end up with 2 toilets. And then this next one, we have like terms, w cubed. If I have negative 9 walruses cubed, take away 3 more walruses cubed, I am in the hole, 12 walruses cubed. And then the other thing you'll be asked to do is write an expression for a phrase. We've already had some experience with this, but they bring it up again because it's more focused on the distributive property. So you actually had a problem like this on a quiz and on a test. Negative 2 times the quantity t plus 7. So when you see that word, you're taking whatever you get here and then multiplying it by negative 2. We need those parentheses there. And then the product of 14 and the quantity of 8 plus w. So again, we want to figure out what 8 plus w is first and then multiply by 14. So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to use the distributive property and simplify some algebraic expressions. Make sure you show your work for both of those. Have a good night.